Hello, everyone. I'm Daz, and welcome to American Civil War and UK History podcast. This presentation is available as a video on our YouTube channel or as a podcast from wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you're watching on YouTube, remember to hit the subscribe button. And to keep up to date with everything American Civil War and UK history, you can do that via our website, where you will find blog posts, updates, and links to all of our social media pages. The link is available in the podcast's description. And joining me today is author and producer with Life in Pictures, Dave Danielson. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you so much, Dax. It's great to be here with you.
Okay, so today's discussion is about John A. Logan and the history behind Dedication Day. So, as it is your first time on American Civil War and UK history, Dave, would you like to tell us a little bit about how you became interested in history, please?
Absolutely. So, first, I want to thank my wife, Jana, and our children for being so supportive of everything that I do and the time that I take to do research and write. It means a lot to me, and obviously couldn't do it without their support. So they are huge in me being able to be here. So I've always loved history, and maybe part of it was because my parents loved history. And I remember growing up and hearing about the story of John A. Logan. My mom's maiden name was Logan. So there's some family relationship to John through time. So I just had grown up hearing about the story of John A. Logan, and how he proved to be, a very, I think, important participant in the war between the states. And but I've been involved with, a great passion for history, whether it's World War II, Civil War in America, but various periods. And I can very easily get drawn into, if there's a history show on television, it doesn't take me much to get drawn into that. I've just always had a gravitation toward that.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm exactly the same. I can't pass up anything really. And I love all periods myself. But okay, let's discuss John A. Logan. Okay, so now he has an interest in life before the American Civil War, doesn't he? And so would you like to just tell us a little bit about his life before the American Civil War, if you wouldn't mind?
Yes, absolutely. So he was born in 1826 in southern Illinois, near what town that today is known as Murfreesboro, Illinois. It's a relatively small town. At that time, it was mostly wilderness, a lot of forest, plains, a lot of rolling hills in that area of southern Illinois. So 1826, he was born, and he was one of several siblings. His parents felt that it was very important for them to secure tutor education for their children. As he came of age, John ended up being quite a horseman. The family always had a lot of, very impressive horses. They put a lot of emphasis on that, and for a time, John even rode in events around the Midwest in the U.S. at that time. Went to the University of Louisville, graduated there. He earned his law degree. But before he earned his law degree, he took part in the war with Mexico. And at the time, he took off and with the soldiers there from Southern Illinois. They marched to Santa Fe, New Mexico. John and most of his detachment did not see action in that war. He did, however, almost die from a severe case of the measles at that time. So they marched to Santa Fe from their rallying point, which was Leavenworth, Kansas, went there, came back, and then he went on with his law degree from there.
Awesome. And so, so he has this a career in the Mexican-American War, as you said. But so he has quite a political career after that. Is that right? And so What do you
Yes.
know about that? Tell us a little bit about that early, because that's going to factor into his life later on as well, isn't it? The political side
Yes.
of things. So tell us about his political career in that period before the American Civil War.
Absolutely, Dax. So John, as he grew up, he was family friends with Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln and John's father, who was also named John, actually surveyed big portions of Illinois together. And so John knew Abraham from a young age. They were not in the same political ranks, however. So John and his family were very staunch pro-Southern states' rights Democrats, and Abraham Lincoln was Republican. In turn, the Logans were very close political allies and friends with Stephen A. Douglas, the Little Giant. And so before the war, John had carved out a very successful legal career as an attorney, where he prosecuted and defended folks in trial cases. He also went on to earn a state House of Representatives seat. Through time, he was there for the Lincoln Douglas debates. And he, at that time in 1858, ran for and earned his first election to the United States House of Representatives. And at that time, he won in a landslide as a freshman congressman. He won with 80% of the vote. And so he went on from there, and then was in Congress when war broke out between the states.
Okay, so when the war breaks out, obviously because of his military service before, does he get a rank straight away, sort of thing? Does he walk straight in as an officer into the Civil War?
Yes, so it was an interesting transition, Dax. So while he was still in Congress, he was standing up. He was about ready to give a speech on the floor of Congress when people rushed in and announced that South Carolina had seceded from the Union. And he did not feel like he could stay on the sidelines. However, he was still in Congress. Events started to transpire, and John was tabbed by the military department to go and observe the battle as a civilian at the first battle of Bull Run. And that was the battle, if you'll remember, where people from Washington, D.C. got in their carriages and their Sunday best and their picnic baskets, and they went out and they thought they were going to enjoy a show. And John was there in civilian attire, as I said, observing for the military department. And things quickly got out of control. It turned out that it was not going to be easy business, as the Union thought of, taking on the Confederacy on that open field and driving them back into Virginia. In fact, quite the opposite. And John got drawn into the battle. He ran out onto the field. He carried some people out of harm's way, some wounded, and he literally got drawn into the battle. He picked up a rifle and fired toward the south. And at that point, his decision was made. And just to give you a little bit of background, so because of the area that John grew up in, again, very deep southern Illinois, which actually is further south than Richmond, Virginia, most of the people in that region wanted to secede from the Union. And John did not feel like he could sit in Congress. He felt like he would not be as useful as he could be as if he went into battle. So what he did was he resigned his seat from Congress. He went back to Illinois and he raised a Union regiment. And in turn, he alienated most of his family and friends, including his own mother, who wouldn't speak to him for a time. And but he raised a regiment of 1,000 guys.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay, so he takes his 1,000 guys and so he joins the Union Army. So tell us a little bit about his career in the Civil War then, because it's quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, Dex. So John and his men, they mustered in. They went to a place called Cairo, Illinois. It's spelled like Cairo, but there in that region they pronounce it Cairo. Cairo, Illinois, which is the furthest southern point of Illinois, right along the Mississippi River, and that's where they trained, got their uniforms, got ready for battle. And his first commanding officer, who he reported to, was Ulysses Grant. And the two men would become lifelong friends from that point forward. So after training, after getting the plans in place, Grant was ready to move. And it was natural to go not too far away to the battlefields of Kentucky and Tennessee. And very early on, even though John commanded a group of volunteers, they distinguished themselves, by all accounts, very well on the field of battle. And his men called John Black Jack because he had very striking, almost black eyes, black hair. And they said that in battle, his eyes were just like filled with lightning. Very striking character. So, in those early battles, the Battle of Belmont and the Battle of Fort Donelson, the Union was able to realize some important victories. And in the Battle of Fort Donelson, John was commanding the 31st Illinois Infantry, which was the regiment that he raised. And at the time, the Union Army was surrounding Fort Donelson, which is a very picturesque area right along a beautiful river there in northern Tennessee. And as the snow fell, sleet, it was winter, they had the fort surrounded. And one morning, as they were ready to kind of go forward, the Confederacy took the initiative. They tried to break out of the fort, and heavy fighting ensued. John in that battle was wounded 3 times, nearly killed him. And he, after the battle, he was nursed back to health for a time in a field hospital, also aboard General Grant's steamship. His wife, Mary, rushed to the front lines from Southern Illinois, brought him back home where he was able to convalesce before he went back to action. So in this first part of the war, after he went back, he was involved again with Grant's campaign that went down the Mississippi River, from Kentucky, Tennessee, down to Mississippi. And they were involved with the siege of Vicksburg. And when Vicksburg finally fell, it was a long siege of Vicksburg. When that city finally fell, General Grant had tapped John, who by this time had ascended to Major General from Colonel. He had gone from Colonel to Brigadier General and then Major General. He asked John to lead the Union Army into the city and raise the American flag again over that town. From there, the fighting started to move east. With Vicksburg's fall, the Mississippi River now was primarily controlled by the Union. And so fighting turned east. And in the process, he got acquainted with one of the men who would become one of his best friends, General James B. McPherson. He also was involved with, a peer of really outstanding generals, including William Tecumseh Sherman, George Thomas, and several others who, for a time, they continued reporting to Grant. before Grant was selected by President Lincoln to become lieutenant general and move out east. When General Grant moved out east, then command of that Western theater fell to General Sherman. And John and the other generals, they continued to work their way east. They had a lot of action through Tennessee and into Georgia. By the time they got to Atlanta, the Battle of Atlanta proved to be a pivotal point. So in that battle, John's good friend, General James B. McPherson, had ridden off with a scout to kind of assess the landscape, assess next moves in that battle. And unfortunately for him, he and his scout got cut off. They were riding out by themselves. They were surrounded by snipers. One of the Confederate gentlemen commanded him to stop. They were going to take him prisoner. General McPherson wasn't going to have that. As he rode off, a sniper got him and killed him there. So in the battle that ensued after that, John rallied the Union troops. He was riding out in front of the lines in the middle of the action. And the account that I've heard from that battle is that the Army was yelling McPherson and revenge, McPherson and revenge. And they ended up, holding their own and tactically having a victory that day. From there, with the fall of Atlanta to the Union troops, John was still, even though he was now a major general in the Union Army, he still was a favorite of Lincoln in terms of, during this time, Lincoln called on John to come north and give a couple of speeches to folks in the Midwest who were really getting tired of the war by now. It had been going on now for at least a couple of years. And he gave speeches saying, we have to hold true to our path. We have to support the Emancipation Proclamation. This is the right thing. This is something that gives our struggle purpose beyond saving the Union. So he had gone north at Lincoln's request, and then when he came back to duty, he joined Sherman back in Savannah, Georgia. So this was a point where really Sherman had completed his march to the sea from Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia. At that point, the Army turned north and started to work its way up through the Carolinas to, in their mind, eventually link up with Grant. And, the plan was to, ideally, by that time, dismantle the remaining Confederate forces with General Lee. So as they made their way through the Carolinas, they had gone through South Carolina, they were in North Carolina, and this is toward the close of the war. And on the night that Lincoln was assassinated, General Sherman and the majority of that part of the Union Army was stationed just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. And word came through and spread like wildfire through the Union camp that Lincoln had been assassinated. And just in kind of a fit of reflex and rage and sadness, about 2,000 of the Union soldiers in that camp on their own, without command, picked up cannons, guns, rifles, and set out in the night to march toward Raleigh to do God knows what. So John and many other men got on horses, ran or rode as hard as they could, and to try to put themselves out there. So when these 2,000 Union soldiers came down over the hill and prepared to make their way over this stone bridge to go into Raleigh, they got about halfway across the bridge, And in the distance, on the other side, they saw John on his horseback. They saw several other Union men and several cannon pointing toward them. So this is one of my proudest moments for John and for, I think, the ability to find peace in the midst of war. John rode out onto the bridge. These guys meant business. They obviously they respected John. They again knew him as Black Jack, a term of endearment. They didn't want to be stopped. They wanted to go in and do whatever they thought they were going to do. And John gave a speech that night that said, he said, please, the person who did this doesn't live there, does not live in Raleigh. One man did this, what we're hearing. He doesn't live there. In a few days, these people are going to realize that they're Americans again. Go home, go back to camp, and years from now, be able to say that you did the right thing, that you didn't give in to revenge and blind hatred. And they did. They left that bridge, they went back to camp, and that was, I think that's one of my proudest moments. So that was kind of the culmination of the war. After that, there were a few smaller skirmishes, a few remaining elements of action. And then John was selected to ride at the head of the Army of the Tennessee on the Grand Review of Union troops through Washington, and mustered out, and then moved on from the Civil War.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks for explaining that. Yeah.
Sorry, I know that was a really long rambling.
No, it was good. I enjoyed listening. Yeah, and it's made me appreciate John even more now. So hearing some of that stuff, so it's fantastic. I was going to get on to after the Civil War now, because obviously John has to go back to family life, and as you said, when he joined the Union, his mum was extremely upset with him. So how did he repair that relationship, and how did he settle back into family life after this horrendous event that took place for 4 years?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, John's mom Elizabeth was a mother, and when he was almost mortally wounded and nearly died, she did come and see him as he was convalescing at home, and they were able to repair their relationship. And from there, after the war, he had not made it back to Congress yet, but he became the head of the Grand Army of the Republic, which you may hear it referred to as the GAR, which was the Union Veterans Fraternal Organization at the time. And while he was serving in that role as overall commander of that, he and Mary, his wife, had been witness to and had heard about a number of moving and touching commemorations that people just spontaneously did in different corners of the country. The country had been through an incredible amount of turmoil, 700,000 soldiers killed or dying in that conflict. And there was this spontaneous combustion, spontaneous feeling that, they wanted to do something. And so there were small tributes, there were events. One of the earliest was in Charleston, South Carolina. A group of Black residents had gone to a place where there had been a POW camp in town, and they had dug up a mass grave where 250 Union soldiers, Black and white, had been buried. And they dug up those brave soldiers. They gave them each individual plots with honors. And some accounts that I've heard have said that there were as many as 10,000 people who showed up for that event to pay honor to the end of the war and to people who had passed in the conflict. So upon hearing about things like this, John and Mary were very moved, as were other people around the country. And so John said, okay, I'm in a position now where I can help to formalize this. The nation has been through something trying and traumatic, and this is something that we should never forget so that it never hopefully happens again. And so he issued what's known as General Order 11, which really was a order that went out to all of the GAR locations around the country saying, on the 30th day of May, please take your most fragrant flowers, decorate the graves of the comrades who died in defense of our country. And it just stuck almost immediately. There were commemorations in Arlington Cemetery in Washington, D.C. John gave a speech at a cemetery in Des Moines, Illinois. And over time, it became known as Decoration Day. And then eventually, by the mid-20th century, the United States Congress ended up adopting that as under the name of Memorial Day. And that's what we commemorate today now in the U.S.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, so am I right in saying that changes in 1971? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you've covered the GAR and the Memorial Day and the Decoration Day. What about his later political career? Because he has quite a long political career after as well, doesn't he? Including all of this stuff that he's doing to honour his fallen comrades and fallen soldiers. So, what do you know about his sort of like later on his political career?
Absolutely, Dax. So he went back to Congress, and this time, as Lincoln had always wanted, John had become a Republican now after the Civil War. So before the war, he was a Democrat. After the war, he was a Republican, and he went back to Congress representing Illinois and served at least a couple of terms there. He also went on to win a seat that he represented for years for Illinois as one of the two senators from Illinois. So he was somebody who was a very fiery orator. He was somebody who you always knew how he felt. He was not afraid to voice his opinions. It was not uncommon for him to get into scuffles on the floor of Congress or the Senate. Less so, after the war. But he was very much he became a very staunch proponent of civil rights. He was somebody who wanted to have a very harsh Reconstruction of the South. He wanted the presence of Union troops to continue for quite some time. As history shows, that didn't happen. When Lincoln died, it didn't take long for Andrew Johnson, the vice president, who then became president, to dismantle a lot of the Reconstruction plans that had been put in place. And with that, there was kind of a vacuum, a power vacuum, where slavery had ended, but now came the Jim Crow South, and now came retribution, and there was not the Union presence that a lot of the harsh Reconstructionists had wanted and had thought would be needed. So through that time, by the way, he was also one of the key congressmen right after the Civil War who was involved in impeaching Andrew Johnson. He was not a fan of Andrew Johnson's policies and was one of the architects of his impeachment. So as time went on and he finished his time in Congress and he went on to the Senate, he had the opportunity to run for president. And at that time, he ended up essentially finishing second at the Republican convention, and James G. Blaine was the Republican nominee for president. John was on the ticket as vice president, and they lost in one of the closest races in American history to Grover Cleveland. And as time went on, John's name was thrown into the hat, and they expected John to run again and probably be the Republican presidential nominee in 1888. However, in 1886, he passed away. He had been standing out in the cold rain near Washington, D.C. for one of his comrades' funerals. And he had severe complications, rheumatism, that were brought on by his life-threatening injuries from the Civil War, and he never recovered. So he passed away in 1886. He was 60 years old, and he was his body laid in state in the Capitol Rotunda for a few days. At that time, he was just the seventh American to lay in state, and buried today in Rock Creek Cemetery in Washington, D.C.
Wow, so he was well thought of then when he passed away.
He was fiery. I think people loved him or disagreed with him severely. Especially I think probably folks in the South who probably did not appreciate his harsh Reconstruction ideals. But he did go on to have enough support to have that opportunity to run for a high office later on.
So there's a few memorials and monuments for John, isn't there, around?
And these are a couple of great photos. So the one on the left is John holding the flag, and this is in Grant Park in Chicago, overlooking Lake Michigan. And that statue has been there since 1897. And during that commemoration of the dedication of that statue, tens of thousands of Chicagoans showed up, along with a lot of his old members of the 31st Infantry, marched in the parade. They unveiled that statue. And then the photo on the right, that is from Logan Circle in Washington, D.C.
So you've written this book about Memorial Day and John A. Logan. So tell us a little bit about the book and tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely, Dax. Thank you. So this has been a labor of love. As I wrote this, I thought, I'm sure that I'm going to need to condense some history, represent some things. And there was a little bit of that, but the more research that I did, Dax, the more I realized this guy had a big life. And, his story is just one of millions of stories from that time that could have been told. And just have, because of my awareness of his story and passion for wanting to help tell his story, was able to find a lot of research materials. I also was very thankful for being able to talk with Mike Jones. And Mike is the head of the John A. Logan Museum in Murfreesboro, Illinois. And he was a great source of information also. But just wanted to really help tell the story of a man who really seemed to be in a lot of key places during the unfolding time. He was a man of his time. He was torn at the beginning of the Civil War. He was raised as a pro-Southern states' rights Democrat. It was a trying journey for him. His wife, Mary, was torn. Her brother, Hybert, went off and fought for the Confederacy. It was very much a family conflict. So I just wanted to try to represent who John was, his ideals that he held onto strongly. And I think that for me, he is a reluctant warrior who, when war came, ended up being very, very good at it. And yet, in that final moment, when the war was winding down and Lincoln had been shot, and blind rage and revenge could have taken over, he had the presence of mind with other men to put themselves between their own men and a town. And that's a proud moment for me. And I think that that helps to go to his role in creating Memorial Day, which he called one of the proudest moments of his life.
Awesome. Okay, so you are a producer, and from what I understand, you're developing a feature film. Is that correct? So you're producer
Yes.
for Life in Pictures. So just tell us a little bit about that and how that's going, and when can we expect to see this movie?
Well, thanks, Dax. This has been another labor of love, and my wife Jana has been a huge resource for me. She is very supportive. She's listened to me read scenes, rewrites of scenes, adding new scenes. So I wrote the script for this, and it is very much in step with the book. It is a story that, I think if we look at books and films, even though there's a little bit more detail in the book than there will be in the movie, again, very much closely in step with each other. At this point, we have been honored to have our production budget spoken for by some investors. So we have our production budget in place. This is an independent film. I have an outstanding team with me at Life in Pictures. And we are at the stage now where we are starting to package the film together. And what that means is, assembling the key talent, looking at who we would like to have play some of the key roles in the film. And so we're at that point, and realistically, as we close down the year 2023, it's possible that we could begin filming in 2024. So that's what we're targeting. And, just try to get through that process, doing the justice that we can to the story and moving it aggressively forward as fast as we can.
Awesome. And, for me as a Civil War buff, another movie about a Civil War personality would be fantastic, so. Yeah,
Well, thank you,
I
Dax.
wish you all the best with that, and hope to see that soon in the future. But before we get off here, is there anything I may have missed that you would like to talk about before we get off here?
I don't think so. I really appreciate you having me on, and I'm honored to be here with you. You do a terrific job with your program, and I am honored to be here with you. And I really appreciate you taking time and for having me. And I just would encourage anyone who, if they have any questions, if they have any points of discussion, please feel free to try to look me up and reach out to me. But in the meantime, Dax, thank you so much. It's really an honor to talk with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving up your time to come and talk to me. And the book link will be in the description, everybody. So if you want a link to the book, it'll be also on the website in there. So you'll be able to find it there. And all that's left to say is thank you very much, Dave. And we'll see you all soon. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers to you.